All right, so I think we're getting pretty good at this factoring with the box method. So last video, just to make sure we got this, so we're going to factor the trinomial 2x squared minus x minus 6. First thing we're going to look for is a GCF. I'm going to write it down so I know I have looked for it. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll forget. So do we have a GCF? 2x squared minus x minus 6. And no, they don't have any common factors. Now let's go to our box. First term goes in the top left, 2x squared. Last term goes in the bottom right, negative 6. Now we're going to fill in our other two boxes with factors of a times c that add up to b. So here's our a times c, so 2 times a negative 6 is negative 12. And then we want factors of negative 12 that add up to our b term, which is a negative 1. So if you think through your factor pairs, that's going to be a 3 and negative 4. So let's fill in our box with a 3x in one and a negative 4 in the other. It does, oh, and that's a negative 4x. Good catch, Mrs. Youngberg. If we had put the 3x up here and the negative 4x down here, we would get the same answer in the end. So I just want to make sure that I don't want you to worry about where those two, how we fill in the last two boxes. All right, so let's factor out to the left. We have a 2x squared and a minus and a negative 4x. We're going to use a positive GCF unless both of these terms are negative, but they're not. So 2 and 4 has a GCF of 2. And then x squared and x, they have at most an x in common. Our bottom row, 3x and a negative 6, again, if they were both negative, we'll use a negative GCF, but they are not, so we'll use a positive GCF. 3 and 6, the biggest factor that 3 and 6 have in common is 3, and both terms do not have an x, so we will not have an x in our GCF. Now let's factor to the top. We have a 2 and a 3. No common factors there, but we do have an x squared and an x, and the most that an x squared and x has in common is an x to the first power. Last column, we have a negative 4x and a negative 6. So here's that example where both of these terms are negative, so we're going to have a negative GCF. And then let's look at that 4 and 6. What's the largest factor that 4 and 6 have in common? That would be a 2. Now look at the x's. This term has an x, but this one does not. So there is no x in that GCF. Now we can go ahead and put our final answer. We have our binomial factors. One of them is 2x plus 3, and the other one is x minus 2. And now we have factored that trinomial. All right, last example. So what are we going to look for first? A GCF, question mark. Is there one? Well, let's see. We have a 10x squared, a positive 3x, and a negative 1. So, no, they don't have any common factors. So then we can go right to our box. Oh, made this one a little bit bigger apparently. Fill in the first term into the top left box, 10x squared. Fill in the last term to the bottom right. And then our remaining two boxes are reserved for factors of a times c that add up to b. So what is that, a times c? Well, 10 times negative 1 equals negative 10. We want factors of negative 10 that add up to a positive 3. So 2 and 5, if we make the 2 negative, that adds up to a positive 3. So let's fill in our box. We can put a negative 2x in one and a positive 5x in the other. Now let's factor the GCFs out to the left and up to the top. So I'm going to look at this row first. We have a 10 and a 5. The largest factor between 10 and 5 is 5. And then we have an x squared and an x. The most number of x's they have in common is an x to the first. All right, this next row we have negative and a negative, so that means we need a negative GCF. And then what do a 2x and a 1 have in common? Well, they don't have any common factors. So when we can't find a common factor, we put a 1 down. Because 1 is a factor of everything. So we can always use a 1 as a common factor when we have to write something in that spot. All right, now let's factor to the top. Coefficients first, we have a 10 and a negative 2. They are not both negative, so we will not have a negative GCF. So just 10 and 2, the largest factor of a 10 and 2 is a 2. And then we have an x squared and an x. So the most number of x's they have in common is just an x to the first. Then we come to our last row, 5x and a negative 1. Again, you don't have two negatives, so we will not have a negative GCF. Do 5x and 1 have any common factors? They do not. So we will write in a 1 as that common factor. All right, now we're ready for write our final answer as two binomials. We have two binomial factors. One of them is that 5x minus 1, and the other one is the 2x plus 1. Just remember, we could have written the 2x plus 1 first and the 5x minus 1 second, and we would get the same answer. These are both correct answers for factoring that trinomial. The reason why it doesn't matter which parenthesis we write first is because this is, when we factor, this is representing multiplication. Multiplication is a commutative property, which means if you switch the order of multiplication, you do get the same answer. So the order doesn't matter when we write multiplication.